Hey, how's it going everybody? It's Bro here, hope you're doing well, and in this video I'm going to be teaching you guys about text alignment, the use of the float property, and the use of the position property in CSS. So let's get into it. Before you reach the end of this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so that we together can challenge and defeat the mighty YouTube algorithm. Hey everyone, so for this video, I would say that this is going to be 3 different mini topics all rolled into one video, just because I don't think it'd be worth it to create an individual video for each of these topics because they really won't take too long. So we're just going to cover them all in one video. So if you want to skip forward, look in the description for any timestamps. And these are things we'd want to cover before we move on to the topics of navigation bars and drop-down menus. So let's begin with the text alignment property. We can use the text alignment property to position text to the left, to the center, or to the right. But first, we'll want to create some sample text. So I'm just going to put this within a paragraph tag, and I will give this a unique ID of maybe P1. Then let's close this right away. And then I will just type in the word left. So now I'm going to copy this and paste it a few times, and we'll create a few other lines. So we'll make the second line P2, and we'll call this center. And the third line, P3, and we will say right. Let's save, reload the page, and move on to our style sheet. Now, by default, all text is aligned to the left, so if I were to move this window here, all the text is being pushed to the left of the viewport, also known as the browser window, basically. So one thing we can do is that we can change that using the text alignment property. So if we were to target P1 and said text align left, there would actually be no apparent change for our word left. But let's use a different position. So maybe for P2, we'll say text, align, center. Let's save, reload the page. See, now this text is in the center of the web page. It's in the center of the viewport or the container that it's in. So if I were to actually resize this window, it's going to continue to stay in the center. And for the last one, take a wild guess. We're going to position this to the right. So let's target P3, and we will text align right. Save, reload, and you guessed it. So the word right is now sticking to the right-hand side of the web page. Now let's put these within a smaller container. So what I'm going to do is target all paragraph elements, and we're going to set a border, spell border right, of 1 pixel that is solid. And we will specify a width of maybe 250 pixels. So let's try this now. Now you can see that since these lines, these words are kind of in a separate container now, they're going to align based on the container that they're in. So you can see that with the word right, it's stopping when it reaches the edge of this container since we specified a width. And the center word is now in the center of this box here. So that's how you can use the text align property to align text to the left, to the center, to the right of some sort of box or a container or the entire web page itself. All right, well, let's move on to the use of the float property, but I'm just going to turn this all into a comment. So this will be like a clean slate then, basically. I'll get rid of all the text here as well. So let me just edit that, then we'll move on. Okay, we're moving on to the use of the float property. So an element that is using the float property will have all other elements or text flow around it, kind of like a river where the river has bends and it's flowing around obstacles. So for this example, I have a logo that I'm going to use. If you want to download some picture and pause the video, feel free to do so. Otherwise, you can just watch me. So I'm just going to include an image here. So image source equals, and for me, it's called logo.png. And then I'll just do some inline styling just to make this simple. I'll give this a width of maybe 150 pixels and a height of 150 pixels as well. All right, let's check out this logo. Yep, there it is. All right, now I'm immediately going to add a paragraph after this. Since I'm using Sublime Text, I can just type in lorem and hit tab. And I'm going to surround this with a pair of paragraph tags. Let's save, reload the page. All right, I have to save my style sheet too. All right, now you can see that there's this big blank space after the logo. That's because this is a block level element, so it's going to take up the entire width of the viewport. Now we can actually have this text start at the top here and flow around the picture by using the float property, but we'll need to target our image then. So I'm just going to type in img for image. We'll say float, and then we can either put this to the left or to the right. So I'm going to say left. Let's save, reload. And now this text is flowing around this element because this element is floating. But I think I'm going to add a little bit of a margin just because the text is really close to the logo. So I'm just going to add that real quick. Maybe margin 5 pixels to make it look better. I would say that's a little bit better. Now let's have this float to the right. So I'm just going to switch left with right. So now, since this image is floating to the right, all other elements are going to flow around it on the left-hand side. But let me just copy this paragraph just so it's more evident because it's not enough text. Okay, yeah, you can see here that this image now has its own little space. It's not taking up the entire width of the web browser then. Now let's make a container to contain all of these elements, and we can just use a div tag for this. So we're going to place a div tag here, and we will end it after our last paragraph. And then on our style sheet, we'll say div, and then we'll give this a border, 1 pixel SolidWorks like always, and maybe a width of 500 pixels. Let's change it. Maybe 300. Okay, that's better. You can see that since this is all within a container now, the image is going to float as much to the right as it can. Otherwise, if this was floating to the left, this would now be on the left-hand side. So that's pretty cool too. So that's basically how the float property works, and we're going to move on to the use of the position property. So I'm just going to comment all of this out on our style sheet and all of this on our HTML document. Alright, well lastly we're moving on to the use of the position property, and there's 5 different values we can place here. The position property is used to position an element someplace on your web page. So we're going to be covering the fixed, relative, sticky, absolute, and static positions. So we're going to discuss the fixed position first. We can fix an element in place within the viewport. So to begin, we'll just need some sample text to work with. I'll just create an H1 heading, and I will just say maybe the word fixed. And then let's close this. I'm also going to add a paragraph too. So I'll type in lorem, hit tab, and then surround this with a pair of paragraph tags. Okay, let's move on to our style sheet. And I'm going to go down a little bit. So let's change the styling on our H1 heading real quick. So I think what I'll do is put a border around this. So 1 pixel, solid. Maybe I'll change the background too so it's easier to see. I'll make this yellow. And maybe a width of 200 pixels. Okay, that should be good then. So what we're going to do now is use the position property, and let's set this to fixed. So we can fix this H1 element in place somewhere on our web page, and we can actually give a direction like we want this 50 pixels from the top, or we want this maybe 100 pixels from the right. So let's say that I want this on the bottom right corner. So what I'll do is that I will say bottom 0 or 0 pixels and 0 pixels from the right. So let's save and reload this. And now this label is now fixed in place to the bottom right of our web page. Although there's a little bit of a margin, but you'll just have to get rid of that. Otherwise, if I put left here, this would be fixed in place to the bottom and to the left. And you can also put pixels here too if I want this a little bit higher up. So 50 from the bottom and 50 from the left. That will place this slightly more up and to the right then. All right, well next is relative positioning, and we can actually update our H1 tag by just using the position property again. So this old instance of us using this position property would basically become null then. So what we're going to type in here is relative. And what this does is that this will position something relative to where it's normally positioned. So if I were to take out these 2 lines and update this, All right, here, this is where this h1 tag is normally positioned, right? Now, if we were to put these back in, this is going to move relative to this location here. So if we said, again, bottom 50 pixels and left 50 pixels, it's going to move based on this location right here, where it normally is. So that's all what the relative positioning is. It's positioning relative to where an element normally is. Okay, we're moving on to sticky positioning, and you might need a few extra paragraphs to get this to work because we need to use the scroll bar. So an element that is sticky, and we'll update the position to that. So position, sticky. What this does is that an element that is sticky will stick to the viewport when you're scrolling, but we'll also need to set a position for this. So I'm just going to say top 0 pixels. Let's save, reload the page. And what ends up happening is that this element is now sticky, so when we scroll down, it's going to stick to some position within the viewport. So this could be useful for like a navigation bar. If somebody's like scrolling down through the web page, they can easily just access the navigation bar. So this sticky positioning has a lot of uses. All right, guys, well, we're on number 4 out of 5 for positions, and this next one is static. And this is actually probably the easiest one. So anything that is static is actually what it normally is by default. So you can just say that this is the default positioning for elements. So if you ever need to reset the positioning for something, you can just set it to static, and it behaves exactly as it normally would. So that's probably the easiest positioning. All things are pretty much static by default. Okay, we're on the home stretch, guys. So we just have one more position to cover. That is an absolute position. So something can be positioned relative to some sort of positioned ancestor. Otherwise, it's going to be relative to the viewport. So I think this is best explained with a demonstration. So I just turned everything that we had into like one giant comment. Same thing for our HTML document. So what I'm actually going to be doing is drawing two different boxes. The outside box is going to be positioned relatively, and the inside box, which is going to be smaller, is going to be positioned absolutely. And the smaller box, we'll call it box 2, is going to be basically positioned relative to the ancestor, which is the larger box. So what we're going to do is just make a div tag, and I will give this a unique ID of maybe box 1. All right, and then I will just add some text like this is relative. It's going to be positioned relatively, and we'll close this. All right, now this is what we're going to do. Between the div tags, we're going to create another div section. So div, and we'll call this ID box 2. And we will say this is absolute, and then close this. So what's going to end up happening is that this ID of box 1, this div element, is going to be the ancestor of our ID box 2. So let's go to our style sheet now and actually create box 1. So we're going to target the ID of box 1, and let's draw a square. And we're going to first position this relative though. All right, and let's set a background color, maybe gray or light gray. I think that'd be better. And a width of 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. And let's add a border as well. Border 1 pixel solid. Let's see what this looks like so far. Okay, we still have a few more things to do too though. Let's work on box 2 now. So box 2. And I'm actually going to copy this and paste it and make a few changes. So let's make this positioning absolute. And the background, just gray. Not light gray, just gray. And the width will be 100 and the height 100. Let's save, reload the page. Okay, that works for box 2 then. So check this out now. Box 1 is the ancestor of box 2. We have these div elements inside another set of div elements. So box 2 is within box 1. Now, since the positioning of box 2 is absolute, what this means is that the position is relative to its, I should say, positioned ancestor. All right. Otherwise, if it doesn't have an ancestor, it's basically just going to be relative to the viewport. All right, so let's center box 2, I would say, within box 1 then. So if we want to put this in the middle, what we can do is just type in 50 pixels from the top and 50 pixels from the left. That should be in the middle then, since this is 200 pixels wide. Let's save, reload the page. Now box 2 is now in the center of box 1, which is the ancestor. Now check this out. If we move box 1, well, box 2 is still going to stay in the center. So since this is positioned relatively, we can also use this top and left property, or bottom and right, depending on what you want to do. So from the top, let's say we want to move this down 100 pixels and maybe 150 pixels from the left. I'm just making up numbers. Okay, let's reload this. So now this box is positioned relatively. So it's normally positioned up here, right? Well, now it's moved down and to the right, down by 100 pixels and to the right by 150 pixels. And you can still see that box 2 is still basically in the center of box 1 because it's positioned absolutely relative to its ancestor. So even though we moved both boxes, box 2 is still in the center then. Okay guys, I'm going to be throwing in a bonus round because I'm probably going to get some questions related to this. So for box 1, let's say that we want this box to stay in the center of our web page. Well, one way that we can do this is that we can, instead of using the left property, just set margin left and margin right to auto. So if we were to save this and reload it, now box 1 is going to stay in the center of our web page. But we'll still have to list where we want this positioned vertically. So it's depending on how large your web page is then basically. But if you want to center something horizontally, just set margin left and margin right to auto then. So you could easily replace these boxes with maybe some sort of frame and a welcome message. So then when somebody visits your web page, they'll have a giant welcome message front and center then basically. So I thought I would just throw this in at the end of the video. But yeah, if you would like a copy of all this markup, I'll post it in the comments down below. I'm sorry this was a longer lesson, but this is something that is, I would say, necessary for CSS just because there's so much that you can do with positioning. But I think we're going to cover transformations and animations pretty soon, so maybe that'll make up for this lesson. But yeah, that is how text alignment, the use of the float property, and the position property work in CSS. Hey you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. If you learned something new, then you can help me help you in 3 easy steps by smashing that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe if you'd like to become a fellow bro.